All right, good afternoon. We'll give it just another minute or so to give everybody a chance to get in the webinar. Welcome. Numbers are climbing, so that's good. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 6th Annual Transfer Summit, first one that's been held virtually. And I'm probably willing to bet it's the first one you've attended in your sweatpants. So congratulations on that. My name is Kristen Schmigelski. I'm one of the Transfer Advisory co-chairs and also lead the Transfer Summit subcommittee as well. We're excited to host you today. We're happy to bring you a nice variety of presentations, a lot of networking opportunities and conversation with colleagues. We're off to a great start though so far. So we have 358 people registered for our Transfer Summit, which is definitely a record for this event that we've seen. So we're happy to have everybody join us. It's been a really challenging year for us all. Now more than ever, we rely on colleagues for support, information, new ideas that have been born from the pandemic. So this is a perfect opportunity to listen to what some of your colleagues have been doing in the transfer world, and then do some of that networking as well. I really think the transfer group is one of the most tight-knit groups out there, and I know that we'll all get a chance to connect over the next 2 days. I also want to thank the Transfer Summit subcommittee for all their work on putting this together, and also the Transfer Advisory co-chairs, April Ponte and Cynthia Delgadillo. So with that, I will go ahead and do a couple housekeeping items, just some quick reminders. We are all through Zoom, as you know. This keynote and then the session tomorrow at 9 a.m. will be held through Zoom webinar. Everything else is through a Zoom meeting. So as you're probably familiar, Zoom meetings allow for a little bit more interaction with one another, and you can talk whenever you want and things like that. All of the summit information is available online. Just go to iacac.org/transfer-summit-2021. So that essentially is our virtual summit program guide this year. You can find all the sessions as well as the Zoom link. So I know you registered for your Zoom sessions ahead of time. If you've changed your mind and you want to jump to something else, refer to that page and you can get the Zoom link from there as well as all the descriptions, presenters, and anything else that you need to know about that. I want to give a quick shout out to our 4 o'clock networking and social this afternoon. That will last from 4 to 5. I can guarantee a good time, lots of laughter. If you want the full description, it's definitely worth checking out on the website to get your details. You may have to run to the grocery store real quick. I guess I'll put a plug in there. But again, a great opportunity for us to all connect with one another. We'll resume tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. and then we'll be all wrapped up by about noon. So again, the format's much different from what we've done in the past, where it's over 2 days, so we don't get that Zoom fatigue that we're all used to. Even though we're not in person, feel free to, if you have pictures or any information you want to share on social media, hashtag it Transfer Summit 2021, or you can hashtag IACAC. That way we're spreading the word about the summit and everything that's going on. And then we also will have an electronic evaluation available. I'll mention this as we wrap up tomorrow, but that will be on the summit webpage as well. We really appreciate your feedback. We have no idea what next year's summit will look like, but we want the feedback. So as we're thinking about and planning for that, we can take all that into consideration. Finally, if you are looking for some ISB professional development hours, those are available, but information will be sent out to verified session attendees later next week. So just check your email for any additional information that you might need. So I'd like to now introduce IACAC's President-elect, Tony Menestra, who would like to say a few words.
Thanks for having me, and thanks to the crew that put together this this brave new conference. We're going through the same thing with our annual conference planning committees, figuring out how to make this all work and how to make it engaging. Seems pretty cool. I'm actually really looking forward to some of those concoctions in the 4 o'clock social hour, particularly attracted to the Guinness and champagne idea. That seemed like a cool one. Kristen asked me to come today to say hello. I don't want to take up a ton of your time, but I do want to share some highlights coming up. Our annual conference is around the corner. I'm going to screen share if I don't screw this up. Getting pretty good at this thing. So our registration now is live. We're up and running. You can find us the same place you can find everything else IACAC related right on the website. We're very fortunate that we've partnered with a non-for-profit organization that does this all the time. So the website looks really cool, which was actually a big deal for me. So you can find all of your information here. Wanted to point out a couple of key highlights. One, the cost this year is roughly about 35 to 40% of what our traditional cost is. It's under $100 for members. We also have a graduate fee, graduate student fee of $25. So if you're currently in a grad program, or if you have folks that you know that are in a grad program that are looking to build out their professional network, $25 gets them the full conference, which is pretty cool. We're working on a 2-day conference this year. So I'll just slide you through. Our first, we're really excited to highlight our keynote speaker, Stedman Graham. He's going to kick off our conference, which will then lead to 30 sessions. A lot of different directions we're going with the sessions. We're being incredibly mindful to be representative of all of our organization. So we look forward to, as the proposals, kind of weed through all of them to see how that shakes down. We're also excited to be featuring a panel on allyship this year, some student-facing professionals, and how we can be better advocates for our students on the margins as professionals. We'll be introducing kind of a fun interactive game called Factuality. It puts all of us as education professionals in the shoes of folks that grew up in very different circumstances than our own. It forces us to see from a different perspective, fun and interactive. Also pumped to be introducing our first congressperson to speak at our conference. Ruben Gallego is born and bred in Chicago on the South Side. He now represents the 7th District of Arizona. Very recently, he made national news as one of the key contributors to protecting those in danger in our Capitol assault a month ago. So Ruben is a true American hero. Happy to hear his perspective. I'm also super excited to invite back 3 of IACAC's all-time greats to close out the conference. We're presenting a session at the very back end of the conference on the second day to talk about where we can go from here. As we know, everything has changed in this last 12 to 18 months, but what good have we taken from this experience? What have we learned as higher ed and secondary side professionals? What do we know moving forward? So we've invited in a panel of educational leaders across other ACACs to speak about that experience. So we're excited about it. It should be fun. I will also add that I took a very non-traditional path to this role of president-elect. So I feel a kindred spirit to the transfer community. I in effect transferred into this profession. I was in my late 20s when I discovered higher ed as a career path. Meandered, for quite a few years after graduation until I found my home. When I did find my home in higher ed, it was almost like this burst of energy. It was this revelation, a place I hadn't discovered or didn't know about, and I was excited for that opportunity. So I understand the transfer experience from a professional side. We're excited for the things happening in ICAC. I won't take up a ton more of your time. Want to welcome you. This is such a cool event. Kristen, thanks for having me. If you ever have any questions, if you're ever curious about how to get involved, I guess I'm the person to ask. You can find me very easily. I'm at DePaul College Prep, and you can find me on the website. So I hope the conference goes well. You've got a killer lineup. I'm really looking forward to see how it goes. Thanks, Kristen.
All right. Well, thank you, Tony. I am happy to introduce our keynote speaker, Julian Parrott. Just a little bit about Julian. Growing up on the other side of the pond in Wales, he came to the U of I as an exchange student. So he found his way to the US for a little bit. And there he quickly learned what humidity was, as well as wind chill. So 2 words he had never heard before that we introduced him to here in Illinois. Julian returned and graduated from the University at Manchester, but then found his way back to the United States, where he pursued a master's from Western Illinois University and then entered the world of journalism. He once again returned to the U of I, so I think you see a theme here, coming back to the U of I, where he started a doctoral program and worked as a grad assistant academic advisor. And that's really where he found his passion in advising students. From there, he directed the academic unit that oversees students who are undecided or undeclared for several years. Then he wanted to add to his portfolio, so he ventured over to the College of Media, where he was able to work with students who had a declared major. Today, Julian is an assistant vice president with a student academic affairs portfolio within the U of I Systems Vice President's Office. It's a lot to say. So with that, I'll now turn it over to Julian, who will talk about leveraging the hidden power behind the journey. One real quick thing, if you have questions throughout the keynote, please use the Q&A. I'll keep track of those, and if we have time at the end, we can address those. But if there's anything you have questions about throughout, feel free to chat with me too. So take it away, Julian.
Thank you, Kristen. Good afternoon. I'm Julian Parrott, and I'm delighted to be with you all today at the kickoff of the 2021 IACAC Transfer Summit. I am also engaged to Oprah. I don't have to tell you that the impact of your work you do as high school counselors, admission counselors, academic advisors, and transfer coordinators is truly life-changing. You have all been incredibly important and influential roles in the lives of all our students. No one can ask for a higher calling, and I've always been proud to call myself an advisor. We have a lot to be proud of in Illinois in its transfer arena. We are #1 in transfer student degree completions. We are #1 in transferology usage. And across the state, we have great transfer pathways between our diverse academic landscape of community colleges and private and public institutions. We have a superb Illinois articulation initiative. And we have a cadre of passionate, committed, and dedicated advisors, counselors, and coordinators to assist all our students on their transfer journeys. It's an awesome responsibility, and it's one that none of you, I'm sure, takes lightly. I was just reading that even a teacher or a counselor is floating the suggestion to a 9th grader that they consider going to college, that they can go to college, can have a significantly positive effect on that student, particularly if that student is first generation. As Kristen mentioned, I work for the University of Illinois system, but really have spent the bulk of my career, some 30 years, as an academic advisor. And for most of my time, I worked specifically with the undeclared freshman and sophomore group. And they were an interesting group of students, to be sure, for they were still very much in their own transfer journeys. And each of those students were on a multiple and rather unique voyage of discovery. And they were instrumental to my own journey. Like many of my students, and perhaps like many of you here, I was unsure of my career path, even as until I was really deep into my grad school journey. I was undecided, undeclared, and still exploring. I was kind of thinking about teaching either in college or high school, or possibly even social work. But then I began working as a grad assistant academic advisor, and then pow, my work with students changed my life. I discovered that playing even a small role in a student's sense of their growing awareness and agency was incredibly rewarding. I thoroughly enjoyed my role, not because it was easy, but actually because it was hard. Students can be a difficult group to work with. They smell fear and inauthenticity, and it takes time and effort to gain their trust and win their respect. But as you know, when you do, it's kind of a wow moment. Although I've always have felt a bit of a fraud, for when chatting with students about their academic and career pathways, I feel like I blundered both into my academic pathway and my career pathway. I won't tell you about how I chose my major in college, but the drinking age when I was in high school in the UK was 18. So a few pints and picking a major that was under A of the alphabet factored in significantly. But I feel so lucky to have blundered into what has become my life's work. And there wasn't much agency or intention. But then I look back at my decision processes, my own journey. I see now how the subtle and important influence certain people played in my decision making. My first boss, who taught me about advising, my advising colleagues, and my students. So I know how incredibly important your role and the role of an individual can be in inspiring and influencing and assisting students to make intentional choices. They're choices that can have a signal impact on their lives. Out there are businesswomen, doctors, lawyers, teachers, journalists, engineers, community advocates, farmers, freshmen in college, moving into their second semester, a student who has just completed their transfer application this morning, people leading engaged and fruitful lives, partly because of you. Some of you know it. They recognize the influence that you played in their lives. Well, some of our students don't, but you know, and we know, for whatever journey the student has taken, you're going to be part of it. And in many ways, long after they have left your office or your school or your college, even perhaps as you slip out of their memory, you will always be part of their journey. We have all recently been on a journey through COVID, and what a long, strange trip it's been. We've all had to adapt. For example, this is my first presentation or a keynote. And usually I like to see the faces of the audience that I'm talking to and at least move around a bit, neither of which I could do now. So even though I have my script in front of me, I'm still probably going to blunder over a few words, and I'm going to say way too often. The virtual environment has tested us not only with issues we have to feel with technology and connectivity, but also to try to authentically connect with somebody through the ether. And we all have had to learn not to roll our eyes when somebody begins to talk while still on mute. But it is amazing to think of how well we've adapted to this new normal. I remember 20 years ago or so, I was given a presentation at an academic advising conference where I mentioned, not part of my presentation, but I just mentioned off the cuff that we'd begun to communicate with students via email. The room was aghast. The issue was so revolutionary, so cutting edge, that it dominated the rest of my presentation. And for those of you who can't conceive of a time when you didn't have email and wonder how we communicated with students outside of the face-to-face environment, we did so via postcards and letters and the occasional phone call. It was Dickensian. And it was a time when WTF meant Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Now, of course, students consider email old-fashioned and quaint. Now I understand that students only respond to us if we send information out in the form of a quick dance via TikTok. Well, I think we've all become quite used to working remotely during our journey through COVID times. And I know that many of us have used the additional time to acquire additional skills. Some of you have learned to play an instrument, taught yourself a foreign language, or have at least become a renowned sourdough baker. I have done none of these things, but I have possibly put COVID to some use, showing you my technical adaptability. This is me prior to COVID. This is me now. And this is what I think I'm going to look like before I can go back to my office. But I'm not here really to talk about my journey through various facial hairstylings or my technical ability to switch to slides while talking with you. I'm going to talk a little bit about some pointers that we can all perhaps glean from this chap who also has some impressive hair. And his incredible but rather trying journey. If, like me, you often wonder how it can take your spouse or your partner or a friend so long to do a task that you yourself will conclude in half the time. My wife, for example, takes an inordinate amount of time going grocery shopping. But can you imagine if your spouse went away on a business trip and then took 10 years to return home? That difficult journey befell Odysseus, king of Ithaca, and his poor wife back at home, Penelope. Odysseus was a man of many abilities, and obviously timekeeping was not one of them. But that was kind of not his fault, or maybe it was. Odysseus was a good husband and a father, and like most folks, he wanted to be the best he could be for his family. But unfortunately, he lived in troubling times, and his position and his military ability and prowess were often tested. Once again, he was called to go to war, even though his preference was to stay at home with his family, watch over his kingdom, and work his farm. However, he was a renowned and fierce warrior, a good leader, diplomatic, persuasive, and creative. The idea behind the Trojan horse was his. But he was also violent, vindictive, and deceitful. And I'm sure now, as an advisor or counselor, you can't help but think, we have a list of his abilities and interests, and you're already automatically assigning him to maybe various programs of study and thinking that he would be good for this major or that major, maybe this career pathway or that other one. And I think you're thinking along the right lines. But let's get back to Odysseus and his journey. So eventually Odysseus did begrudgingly answer the call to war. And so off he went with a large band of his fellow countrymen, fought in the war that ended in victory for the Greeks. And Odysseus and his men were allowed to return home. And they were anxious to go back home to see their wives and families and their homeland. So he and his men boarded 12 ships, and off they set for the short trip to their sunny homeland. And you can imagine their excitement and anticipation. And Odysseus had grown deeply attached to his men that had fought by his side, shared and suffered the kind of losses and privations common to battlefields from ancient through modern times. So he was desperate to get his home safely. But as soon as they set sail, they were initially driven off course by some mysterious storms. They were looking for safe harbors, but unfortunately their problems were only just beginning. For as storms battered their little fleet, they sought a safe port on an island where they found the inhabitants were not at all welcoming. And they indulged in a little argy-bargy with the inhabitants that led to the death of a bunch of Odysseus' men. But able to board the ships, off they set sail again, where this time they land on another island, the land of the Lotus Eaters, who are kind of drugged out hippies. And Odysseus' men find themselves sort of suckered into this sleepy, drugged out stupor, which then actually resulted in them being captured by a rather hungry Cyclops, who ate a few more of Odysseus' men. Odysseus uses his guile and a bit of violence to eventually secure the escape of his remaining men back on the ships, back off into the ocean. So off they sail again. And this time, their homeland is in sight. Lovely Ithaca is on the horizon. And they're believing they're safe. Earlier, Odysseus had received a secret gift box from a minor god, the keeper of the winds. And his men were kind of jealous that Odysseus had this gift box. So when his back was turned, they opened it up, hoping to share the spoils among themselves, only to release unfavorable breezes that even with Ithaca in sight, once again blow them way, way off course. Off course again and onto another island, and this time into the arms and bellies of a hungry tribe of cannibals. Again, Odysseus and his men escaped, but now he was down to one remaining ship and one remaining crew. So I know so far that his trip has probably been almost as bad as a 5-hour trip up to the Wisconsin Dells with a bunch of kids fighting in the backseat over somebody's looking at me wrong, or his leg's on my side, and they're melting crayons into the seat fabric, they're spilling ketchup all over themselves, the dog is sick in the way back of the van. But the clarion call of various water parks assuages any frustration that the kids and you may be feeling, and your frustrations are forgotten as the Dells become in sight. But back in ancient Greece, it was about to get much worse for Odysseus and his remaining crew. They visit another island, and this leads to an encounter with the witch Circe. And Circe, along with some enchanting music and a few barrels of wine, turns Odysseus' men into pigs. Perhaps no surprise there for the choice of animal. Odysseus, however, escapes his porcine fate and becomes captivated by Circe and kind of settles down with her, becomes a lover, and is only able to persuade her to return his men from pigs. And they live kind of happily for a year until kind of that clarion call of Ithaca continues to call him and his men home. So off they set again. They bounce a little bit more around the Mediterranean, and Odysseus learns that things on Ithaca have gone really badly. They all believe he's dead, and his wife and his home is besieged by suitors wanting to be Penelope's husband and wanting to be king of Ithaca. Right, he thinks this time, better set off for home proper. And this time they're able to ignore and avoid a bunch of pitfalls. They ignore the siren's call, terrible weather conditions. Now he does lose some more men to a six-headed monster. But this kind of respite ends once again when Odysseus' ship is sunk and all his remaining crew are drowned. Only Odysseus survives. At this point, I'm sure you feel really sorry for his men and the fate that's befalling Odysseus, but at least he's alive. And there's more. Odysseus washes ashore upon another island where he's now captivated and kind of captured by the nymph Calypso. He stays there 7 years. He has a couple more children with Calypso. And then finally, he kind of comes to his senses and decides it's time to go home for real. On his way home, he survives yet another shipwreck before landing on Ithaca. There, he realizes nobody recognizes him. He has to take on a disguise. He kind of reconnoiters his home, and he's unrecognized by home, his family, even his wife. Perhaps it's because he has a big giant beard. Only his faithful dog recognizes him. It had been determined that the suitor who wins an archery competition can marry Penelope and become king of Ithaca. So wearing a disguise, Odysseus enters the competition. He wins it, but is still unrecognized. But now kind of king again. He kills all his suitors, kills all his servants that were unfaithful to him. And then with a little intervention from the gods, Penelope finally recognizes him, and peace returns to Ithaca and peace returns to Odysseus and Penelope. Yay. So why and how and what's the point of all this? You know, clearly this is a story that's replete with many messages. Don't upset the gods would be one of them. Avoid cyclopses, cannibals, and six-headed monsters when you can. I think that's all good advice we can all get behind. Be wary of Greeks bearing gifts, and men are quite often literally pigs. But in this conference's context, this story is all about embracing one's innate abilities and interests. For the clue to the story rests in Odysseus' name. And I'm aware that there can be some debate over the interpretation of the name, but for the sake of this talk, it is Odysseus, to hate, to bring pain. And I know it's always tough to give a child an aspirational name, something they have to live up to. But in Odysseus's case, this was the undeniable expectation that the gods had, that his countrymen had. And he'd spent most of his life living up to that name. That is who he was. That was who he was supposed to be. Odysseus, the bringer of pain. It was literally his God-given personality for his role in his life and his times. And his apprehension, his attempts to avoid being called to war, had already upset the gods. And then his attempts to bring his men home safely from war was, in essence, turning away from his very nature. The very gods that imbued him with a personality that was cruel and noted for a propensity to violence punished him and his men for not continuing to live up to his abilities. And if you'd notice in the story, it was only when he once again accepted his true and natural role by putting Penelope's suitors and his unfaithful servants to the sword that his life and the life in Ithaca could return to normal. So there's no mystery to the point I'm using this ancient story to make. There is no mystery to good school and college counseling and advising. It's getting to know the student you're on a shared journey with, getting to know their abilities and interests. And the really hard part is getting the student to recognize those abilities and interests and reconciling them. And you need to do this without utilizing all the fates the gods had that befell Odysseus. And you need to do this with total authenticity. And that's difficult to do as an advisor. And it's really, really difficult to train. I once worked with an advisor, a new advisor, who had a mantra that was basically, there are no bad students, they're just bad advisors. It was kind of cute as a saying. But I've worked with bad students, and shock horror, I've worked with students that personally I didn't like. There's no secret there, for if we're all being honest, we've all had those students, and we will all continue to have those students. And it can be a struggle to work with them. It's easy to work with easy students, but I think working with the students that stretch us make us better advisors. And I believe there's a key to working with students, working with good students, working with bad students, working with all students. And that is, as the brilliant American philosopher Debbie Harry of Blondie so eloquently put it, I'm always touched by your presence, dear. And if you don't know Blondie, check them out on YouTube, Heart of Glass, I would say. Although as a teenager growing up in the UK, I always thought she sang, I'm always touched by your presence, as in birthday and Christmas gifts. And in a way, it's a very valid interpretation, for we all possess the very ability to make a gift of our presence. I once sat in with a relatively new advisor on a hot and muggy Friday afternoon after an incredibly busy and tiring week. And I thought I was going to be part of her training process. I was going to give her feedback on her last advising appointment. But boy, by the appointment's end, I had been so impressed by how welcoming, how clearly prepared, how she had made the student relax and smile and talk, and by how well she had listened. The advisor had made the student feel like they were the most important person in the room. And why? Because they were the most important person in the room. I asked the advisor how, in her kind of greenness, how she was able to do this. And she said that she had quickly realized that a student may only have the opportunity to have one advising appointment through the entire semester. So it was incumbent upon that advisor to make it special, make it count, make it meaningful. And even though she had met with maybe 50 students that week, she was able to make a gift of her presence for that student, for that advising session that student was the most important student on her roster. And I was incredibly inspired by that, because you inspire. And through your inspiration, you make the student aspire. And it's a process that's a shared process where we both maybe will perspire. I remember a student of mine. He was not a great student and someone I actually never really felt I connected with. And he became the kind of student that when his name popped up in my schedule, my stomach hollowed. He struggled academically. He wouldn't reconcile abilities and interests. He appeared never to want to be in my office. He rarely spoke or responded to my questions. I felt he never really listened. I felt he never really took my advice. But eventually, after a difficult journey over a couple of years, he did settle into a major, and he transferred, and he was gone off my roster. Until a day, a semester or so later, when he showed up in the waiting room again, I saw him on my schedule, and I literally felt the old familiar stomach hollowing experience again. And I anticipated a difficult conversation, that he was failing, that he didn't like his major, something had gone wrong. He wanted to transfer back to my unit. Those kind of things were the advising conversations that were already running around my head. But actually, he'd simply made the time to pop in my office and thank me. And I share this not to disingenuously paint a picture of me as a brilliant advisor, honestly, but to emphasize the impact we all have on students, even when we don't realize it. I was incredibly embarrassed and chagrined after this appointment. This lad's somewhat painful journey was one I didn't personally share. And I think that it was almost simple luck or dumb fortune that through some kind of advising autopilot that he had taken from me a level of support and encouragement that I didn't feel. And I'd missed a connection there. And it served as an incredibly rude awakening to me. It was a bitter on-the-job lesson. And I took it to heart. It was a simple yet fundamentally critical lesson of just connect. Just connect. As E.M. Forster implored us to do over a century ago, just connect. Yeah, and one of the hardest parts about connecting is you're going to have to do it authentically and you have to do it realistically. And I believe you connect by challenging. And I think it's one of the hardest things advisors can have to do is to be realistic. And sometimes you have to be their Simon Cowell in their lives. No, they can't do anything if they only put their minds to it. But you must establish enough trust to be of some of this influence. For perhaps it was my self-disclosure that reached my difficult student. For no matter how intensively I studied, how many times I met with tutors, or how many idiots' guides to language learning I read, I could only scrape a C in German after my second attempt. And that was only because my teacher took pity on me. And that teacher, a fellow graduate student at the time, worked hard to be present for me. So it's another lesson for me to continue to endeavor, to aspire to, is to always be present for my students and colleagues. And I have worked with hundreds of advisors over my career, and I've trained scores. And I've always found that I too have been trained by scores as well. And the one thing that I have always noticed is how difficult it is to train that immutable sense of authenticity. And I think we all entered this profession because we had a desire to help. We have personalities of connection and have that desire to be present. But I think that when we embark on our career journeys, we were, or still are, rather more nervous about the information, the courses, the programs of study, the course patterns, the application process, the transfer process, the policies, practices, and procedures. And we begin to focus on those things that we kind of put the relational in the background. And that's just disappointing for many reasons. It is the relational that drove us to this career. And it is the most important. Because seldom is a student going to be inspired by online course catalogs. They're going to be inspired by you. They're not going to plan journeys to explore parallel pathways by themselves. We are Odysseus, but with rather more genteel outlook on life and life-affirming characteristics. We need to follow our own abilities if we are to be part of the student's journey. And like Odysseus, we are going to face voyages replete with pitfalls, wrong turns, and disappointments. Our resilience and determination and adaptability are going to be tested. But we, you, are going to be more than a match for some storms and monsters. For surely the last 11 months have tried and tested us like nothing before. We have been through the rough seas and foul winds of COVID, but a safe landing is approaching. And we'll all have some interesting stories to tell about our journeys. The odd and embarrassing things that we've seen or heard on in Zoom meetings. Our collective struggles with the mute button, having constantly over Zoom been exposed to packs upon packs of barking dogs and have been occasionally flummoxed by a troubling cat filter. And although we'd like to, I'm sure, take a collective sigh of relief at this time, we may think that we are so close, even with the bright and sunny island in sight. But like Odysseus, our journey is not yet done. For in many ways, we're about to embark on a new and difficult one. Because our students, their journey through COVID ramifications is not done, and it is going to continue. Their experiences over the last year are like nothing that we have experienced in terms of the issues of disconnection, disengagement, and of learning loss. These are going to be profound issues that will be very much part of our post-COVID professional environment. And as we sit next to or across from our students, I think they are going to need more support and encouragement, more inspiration, more and deeper connection, more and more than ever before. When I used to chat with high school students, being a Brit, I never really understood some of the cultural touchstones that they held so dear and considered so important. Who cares about who homecoming king or queen was? What the hell was the prom? What about yearbook? And what's all this malarkey about bringing soap to high school football games? These were only things I had seen in movies. I never experienced them. I did, however, used to get excited when they mentioned NHS until I realized that they weren't talking about the venerated British National Health Service, but were talking about something called the National Honor Society. But now, however, to some extent, we have all shared the experiences of studying or working from home, of referring to pants as either soft, such as sweats, or hard, such as jeans. And today is the fourth time I've worn a tie in almost a year. Pre-COVID, the fourth time I would wear a tie in a week would be Thursday. So we've all had, to some degree, have experienced a level of trauma through not just one pandemic, but the 3 pandemics we have experienced over the last 11 months. Our current, future, and potential students have had a lot of issues to deal with, and they will continue to do so. We will have to help restore a sense of connection, maybe a sense of trust in the academic enterprise. We're going to have to emphasize the relational more than ever before. Like the high school counselor or teacher that can make a difference by planting that seed about going to college, we need to make a difference now by simply and genuinely asking the student, how are you doing? And ask that question with a genuine desire to hear and react to that student's response. American author Joan Didion suggested that we tell stories to live. And a student hearing about your parallel experience through COVID some of the stresses and uncertainties that you and your loved ones have experienced, will establish a common set of understanding and hopefully will help you build a bridge of mutual trust and respect. Your accessibility now will be key. Perhaps you can provide examples of how you took care of your and those around you mental health and well-being. For we all have stories. We've all been on journeys, and we're still on the journey. And not to add yet another role to your already full and expanded portfolio, you very much must become familiar with the warning signs that may indicate your student needs a different level of support. I started my talk this afternoon with a genuine understanding of the incredibly important role that you all play in a student's academic journey, but also in the development as well-rounded, self-actualized adults. And right now, and for the next couple of years, your role has taken on this additional importance, not only to re-encourage the student to make well-educated, informed decisions as to their futures, be they a CTE certificate at a community college, or returning to school as an adult learner, or attaining a PhD in classics, but to check in on their health and well-being. Your presence, your interest, your caring is going to be an important safe harbor for your students. But it's a fine line, because ships weren't made for safe ports and harbors. So you'll need to occasionally encourage and at times cajole. You'll need to offer a safe hand on the tiller or provide your services as a skilled navigator. You need to give them the tools, the encouragement and the inspiration, and let them provide the perspiration, and they'll finish the job. And for those of you keeping track on the quote bingo, yeah, we're in a hidden Winston Churchill quote there. I think all of us in this profession are by nature storytellers. And there's always been a special, almost revered seat in society for the bard. You can imagine in a dank cave on a cold autumn night, as a beast howled somewhere outside, the warmth and comfort that came when the tribe gathered around the fire to listen to the storyteller regale the tales of the great hunt, or finding the juicy berry patch, or how the young ones found a honey-rich hive and were stung for their labors. It is no mistake that our earliest attempts at non-verbal communication, cave paintings, are also examples of storytelling. It's not just entertainment, it's educational. It was inspiring. It created a sense of shared community. It was incredibly powerful. And we must never shirk away from the opportunity to communicate. We must never turn away from the chance to connect. And we must never not believe in your students. I think that was a double negative. Winston Churchill, an incredibly skilled and gifted communicator, one of the world's highest paid journalists of his time, a Nobel Prize for Literature recipient, a man who, as it said, marshaled words like soldiers and sent them off to battle. Even he occasionally missed an opportunity to connect. Once sequestered in his study, working on his memoirs of World War II, his 5-year-old grandson was able to dodge kind of this phalanx of secretaries and researchers that worked outside of Churchill's office. And even though he always had specific instructions never to be disturbed, the grandson burst into his room. And there the great man stood at his desk, looked down at his 5-year-old grandson with a scowl. And his grandson looked up at Churchill and said, "Granddad, are you the greatest man in the world?" And Churchill thought for a moment and said, "Yes. Yes, I am. Now bugger off." And so Churchill missed that opportunity to connect and communicate with his grandson. And for me, the presentation is never quite done unless there's a Churchill quote or story to add. So finally, I'd like to thank you for the invite to speak with this conference today. Conferences such as this provide great opportunities to engage with the information of the presentations, to get involved in the stories and the journeys of others. We can always learn from each other, and we can always support each other through our communications and our connections, for we're all on this journey together. I'm going to go, my next journey is to go and attend the session and learn from a presenter that is a former colleague of mine. But before I switch gears to become an audience member rather than a presenter, I'd like to leave you with one last quote, which I believe simply and yet beautifully encourages us as we embark on our next journeys as advisors and counselors and coordinators, as we embark on our journeys with students. And it's from Walt Whitman. And Whitman wrote, "Now, Voyager, sail thou forth to seek and to find." So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Julian. Like you said, it's so different presenting when you can't see or hear anybody else. So I can guarantee, though, you had lots of head nods and some laughter, too. I think I'm going to use some of that material for the future. So kept it up here. So as we're just about 10 minutes away from the next session, just as a reminder, refer to the Summit webpage for any session descriptions, as well as those Zoom links if you didn't register ahead of time or if you don't have it available. And we'll get started with the next session at 2 o'clock. And then after that, reminder, then we'll have a 3 o'clock session, and then we'll see you at 4 at the social and networking event. So if you have any questions throughout, feel free to email me. You can also email the transfer team as well, and we'll be checking that throughout. So don't hesitate, and we look forward to a good summit. Thank you.